I found out my father was throwing his 60th birthday party at a resort, the resort my daughter and I weren't invited to. Not invited because of scheduling. The invitation said it in writing, no children, no exceptions. That meant my 14-year-old granddaughter to him, my daughter, was not welcome. What my family didn't know is that I owned a third of that resort. For 12 years, they thought I was a struggling single mother barely getting by on a paralegal's salary. They were wrong about almost everything. And on the night of that party, they were about to find out just how wrong. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Rachel Coleman, and I want to tell you exactly how a woman my own family considered a disappointment ended up holding the deed to the building where they were celebrating. It started 19 years before that party, when I was 22 and finishing my last semester at a university in Central Ohio. I fell in love with a graduate student named Brian Foster, and 4 months before graduation, I found out I was pregnant. Brian did not want to be a father. He accepted a research position on the East Coast within weeks and told me, almost gently, that this was not the life he had planned. I never heard from him again after my daughter Emily was born. I was on my own before I had even finished unpacking my dorm room. My father, Robert Colford, had spent 30 years building a name for himself in commercial real estate across the Midwest. He measured everything in reputation, and to him, an unmarried daughter with an infant was not a joy, it was a liability. When I told him, his exact words were that I had made my bed and now I could lie in it without his help. My mother, Carol, cried but did not argue with him. My older sister, Denise, was the one who said the words that stayed with me the longest. She told me I had always wanted attention, and now I had finally gotten it, at the cost of the family's dignity. She said this while standing in the living room of the house I grew up in, 3 weeks after I had given birth alone in a hospital 40 minutes from anyone who loved me. So I left. I moved into a 500-square-foot apartment in a town called Milford Junction, took a job as a paralegal at a small personal injury firm, and began the long, unglamorous work of raising a child with almost nothing. My starting salary was just under $45,000 a year. After daycare, rent, and groceries, I had roughly $200 left each month, and some months I had less than that. I did not go to family holidays. I told myself it was easier that way, and for a long time, it was. What none of them knew, because I never told them, was that during those long nights reviewing insurance files, I started noticing something. I started noticing which cases attorneys were settling for far less than they were worth, and why. I began keeping notes. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I could not stop seeing the patterns once I saw them. By the time Emily was 5 years old, I had taken the LSAT without telling a single member of my family, and I scored high enough to be accepted into a night program at a law school 2 hours away. For 3 years, I worked full-time during the day, drove to class 4 nights a week, and came home to a daughter who needed help with homework and a bedtime story. I slept in fragments. I lived on coffee, discount cereal, and a kind of stubbornness I did not fully understand myself until years later. My family believed, the entire time, that I was still exactly where they had left me. I passed the bar exam on my first attempt when Emily was 9 years old, and I was hired as an associate at a firm that handled catastrophic injury cases. Within 2 years, I made junior partner, because it turned out that everything I had absorbed during those years of quiet observation had made me unusually good at knowing what a case was truly worth in front of a jury. By the time Emily turned 12, my annual income had crossed $400,000. But I still lived in that same small apartment in Milford Junction. I still drove a car that was well over a decade old. I still shopped at the same discount stores I always had. I was not hiding poverty anymore. I was hiding wealth, and I was doing it on purpose. I was putting more than half of everything I earned into investments, because I had decided a long time ago that the version of me my family believed in would never see a dollar of what I was actually building. I bought a small rental property outright, then a second one, then a modest commercial building with 3 tenants. By the time Emily was 13, my net worth had quietly passed $3 million, and my family still introduced me at gatherings, on the rare occasions I attended, as the one who works as a paralegal and is raising that little girl on her own. I never corrected them. Every dismissive comment became something I could use. Every pitying look became fuel for the next investment. 3 years before that birthday party, I found out that a boutique resort on the coast called Marlow Bay was going up for sale. I had driven past that property more times than I could count over the years, always slowing down, always wondering what it would feel like to own something that beautiful. It was in poor condition, badly managed, and priced at just under $20 million, but I could see exactly what it could become. I partnered with 2 other investors, a retired hospitality executive and a commercial developer I had worked with on prior deals, and together we purchased Marlow Bay. I put in over $6 million of my own money, took out financing against my other properties, and became the managing partner responsible for every major decision at the resort. We renovated it for 8 months and reopened it as one of the most sought-after boutique properties on that stretch of coastline. Within 2 years, the value of the property had grown by nearly 70%. I ran that resort while practicing law and raising a teenager, and somehow I made it work, though I will admit there were nights I fell asleep at my desk with the lights still on. Emily was thriving. She was on the debate team at her school, she had good grades, and she had no idea, for a long time, exactly how much her mother was worth on paper, because I did not want money to change how she saw either of us. I did not want her growing up believing that wealth was something you announced. I wanted her to understand that it was something you built quietly, and used carefully, and that is exactly what I intended to teach her, until the invitation arrived in early November. It came on heavy cream cardstock with gold lettering, exactly the kind of invitation my sister Denise would have designed herself, because she had. It read that my father, Robert Colford, would be celebrating his 60th birthday on the 15th of December at Marlow Bay Resort, black tie, adults only, no children, no exceptions. I read that line 3 times before I understood what it meant. It meant Emily. It meant my daughter, his granddaughter, was not welcome at a party being held inside a building I partly owned. I called Denise that same evening, and she told me, in the same tone she had used 19 years earlier, that this was Dad's night, that surely I could find a sitter for one evening, and that she did not need my, as she put it, complications, at an event this important. I did not tell her the truth on that phone call. I said only that I would think about it. That night, I sat down with Emily at our kitchen table and told her that her grandfather's party was excluding her by name, in writing, and that I intended to do it anyway. Emily, who had grown up watching me absorb this family's coldness without complaint, asked me a simple question. She asked me why I kept letting them treat us this way when I never had to. I did not have an answer for her that night, but 3 weeks later, I had a plan, and it began with a phone call to the general manager of Marlow Bay, a man named Nathan Price who had worked with me since the renovation and understood exactly what kind of decisions I was capable of making when it came to my own property. I told Nathan that on the night of December 15th, I wanted every detail handled a particular way, and he listened without interrupting once, and then told me it would be his pleasure. I arranged for Emily to spend that evening in the resort's owner's suite instead, with room service and every comfort available, because even though she could not attend the party, she was still, in every sense that mattered, standing on ground that belonged to her family. I bought a dress I would never have allowed myself to buy years earlier, a black evening gown from a boutique 2 hours from home, along with shoes and professional hair and makeup, because if I was finally going to stop hiding, I intended to stop hiding completely. On the evening of the 15th, I dropped Emily off at the suite myself, watched her settle in with a stack of movies and a dinner menu longer than anything we had grown up affording, and told her I would come find her the moment the night was over. Then I went to prepare myself in a private room at the spa, and when I looked in the mirror afterward, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I did not look like the paralegal my family believed I still was. I looked like exactly what I had become, and for the first time in 19 years, I intended to walk into a room and let people see it. The ballroom that night was extraordinary, filled with roughly 60 guests, string lights, a live quartet, and servers moving quietly with trays of champagne. My sister had spared no expense, which was almost funny to me now, considering whose expense it ultimately was. She saw me first, and I watched her expression shift from surprise to something more guarded as she asked, a little too casually, where I had found such an expensive-looking dress. My mother kissed my cheek and asked, gently, whether it had been difficult arranging childcare for the evening, and I told her only that it had worked out. My father held court near the bar as he always did, introducing me to his associates as his younger daughter who worked in legal support, a description that had not changed in over a decade despite everything it left out. Dinner was served, Wine was poured, and Denise stood to give a toast about our father's vision and success, mentioning, with obvious pride, that this particular resort had been chosen because it reflected excellence, recently renovated, exactly the kind of property that matched his standards. I said nothing. I simply waited, because I knew what was coming. Around 9 that evening, Nathan approached my father's table and explained, with complete professionalism, that the owner of Marlow Bay Resort had a request regarding the evening's arrangements. My father, visibly irritated, demanded to know who exactly thought they had the authority to interrupt his celebration, and Nathan told him, without raising his voice even slightly, that the owner was present, and had been all evening. The silence that followed lasted longer than I expected. My father's face moved through confusion, then recognition, and finally something close to disbelief as Nathan said my name aloud for the entire table to hear. Denise went pale in a way I had genuinely never seen before. My mother stood halfway up from her chair and then sat back down as though her legs had stopped cooperating. I rose from my own table and walked toward them, and for the first time in 19 years, I did not feel small in that family's presence. I told my father happy birthday, and I told him, plainly, that I owned a third of the building we were standing in, that I had built a legal career worth nearly $500,000 a year, and that my daughter, the granddaughter he had excluded by name in writing, was upstairs in the finest suite in the resort, because even if she was not welcome at his table, she was always welcome on ground that belonged to her mother. I will not pretend the rest of that night was simple. There were tears, there were accusations, there was a long and uncomfortable silence across that ballroom as 60 guests absorbed a version of events none of them had been prepared for. But there was also, later that night, a knock on the suite door, and my father standing there asking if he could speak with both Emily and me. He apologized, slowly and without excuses, for 19 years of shame he had placed on a daughter who had done nothing but survive and then build something extraordinary out of that survival. It did not erase 19 years. But it was, for the first time, a beginning instead of another ending, and in the weeks that followed, my mother began calling weekly. My sister sent a long and difficult letter admitting to years of quiet jealousy dressed up as judgment, and my daughter finally began to know grandparents who showed up, imperfectly, but honestly, 12 years later than they should have. I think about that invitation often, the one that told my daughter, in gold lettering, that she was not welcome. I think about how close I came to simply staying quiet the way I had for 19 years, letting my family believe whatever version of me made them comfortable. But I had spent too many years building something real to keep hiding it behind a story that was never true. I was not the daughter who ruined her potential. I was a mother, an attorney, an investor, and the owner of the very ground my family stood on the night they finally had to see me clearly, and I have not gone back to being invisible since.